Overcoming sales anxiety by focusing on what you can control. Here's something nobody tells you about sales anxiety. It's not caused by the rejection. It's not caused by the difficult client. It's not caused by the quota you haven't hit yet. Sales anxiety is caused by one specific cognitive error. You are paying attention to the wrong thing. And I don't mean that in some vague motivational sense. I mean it neurologically. Your brain is literally allocating its most expensive resource, prefrontal cortex processing power, to something you have zero control over. And that allocation has a measurable cost. It degrades your working memory. It disrupts your ability to read social cues. It floods your system with cortisol at the exact moment you need to be calm, present, and sharp. So if you've ever walked into a meeting and felt your mind go blank, if you've ever stumbled over your words because you were too busy calculating whether this deal would close, if you've ever avoided making a call because the thought of hearing "no" made your chest tighten, that's not weakness. That's a brain running the wrong program. And today, I want to show you exactly how to rewrite that program. Most people think sales anxiety comes from a lack of confidence. They think if they just believed in themselves more, if they just had more experience, if they just had a better product or a better pitch, the anxiety would go away. This is wrong, and it's wrong in a way that actually makes the problem worse. Here's why. When you frame the problem as "I need more confidence," you create a dependency on a feeling. You start waiting to feel confident before you act. You start scanning your internal state for some signal that says, "Okay, now you're ready." And because anxiety is, by definition, the absence of that signal, you end up trapped in a loop. I need confidence to act, but I can't feel confident because I haven't acted, and I can't act because I don't feel confident. This is what psychologists call an avoidance loop, and it's one of the most common traps in sales, in entrepreneurship, in any domain where your performance is tied to uncertain outcomes. The second misconception is even more dangerous. A lot of people believe that if they just work harder, make more calls, send more emails, push through the discomfort with sheer willpower, the anxiety will eventually burn off. Grind culture loves this narrative. Just push through it. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And look, there's a grain of truth there. Action does matter. But raw, undirected action without changing what your attention is locked onto is like running on a treadmill. You're expending enormous energy and going nowhere, because the underlying pattern, the pattern of fixating on outcomes you can't control, remains intact. You're still anxious. You're just anxious and exhausted. So the problem isn't a lack of confidence, and the problem isn't a lack of effort. The problem is a misallocation of attention. Here's the core idea, and I want you to really sit with this. Anxiety is not a feeling problem. It's an attention problem. And the moment you redirect your attention from outcomes you can't control to actions you can execute, the anxiety doesn't just decrease, it gets replaced by something far more useful. Engagement, that one shift from outcome focus to process focus, is the single most powerful thing you can do for your performance in sales, in business, in any high-stakes human interaction. And it's not a mindset trick. It's a structural change in how your brain operates. Let me explain why this works at the neurological level, because understanding the mechanism is what makes this stick. Your brain has a threat detection system centered around a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. The amygdala's job is simple: scan the environment for danger and trigger a response. When it detects a threat, real or imagined, it activates your sympathetic nervous system. Heart rate goes up, palms get sweaty, breathing becomes shallow, blood flow shifts away from your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex thinking, social reasoning, language, and creativity, and toward your limbs, preparing you to fight or run. Now here's the critical point. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between a physical threat and a social threat. Getting rejected by a prospect, activates the same neural pathway as being chased by a predator. Your brain processes social rejection as a survival threat. This isn't metaphorical. Brain imaging studies have shown that social rejection activates the same regions, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, that process physical pain. So when you're sitting there before a big sales call, and your mind is running scenarios about how it might go wrong, about the client saying no, about looking foolish, about losing the deal, your amygdala is firing as if you're in actual danger. And once it fires, it hijacks your prefrontal cortex. Your working memory capacity drops. Your ability to think on your feet, to listen deeply, to ask the right follow-up question, to pick up on subtle emotional cues from your client, all of that degrades. You become cognitively impaired at the exact moment you need to be at your sharpest. This is called amygdala hijack, and it's the neurological basis of sales anxiety. But here's where it gets interesting. The amygdala responds to what you're paying attention to. If your attention is locked onto the outcome, will they say yes? Will they say no? What will happen to my numbers? What will my manager think? You're feeding the amygdala a continuous stream of uncertain, uncontrollable stimuli. And uncertainty is the amygdala's primary trigger. It doesn't fear bad outcomes as much as it fears unpredictable ones. Now, contrast that with what happens when your attention shifts to the process. When you're focused on executing a specific action, asking a well-crafted question, listening to the client's response, identifying their actual concern, structuring your next sentence, you activate a completely different neural network. You engage your prefrontal cortex in task-specific processing. You enter what neuroscientists call directed attention mode. And in this mode, the prefrontal cortex actually exerts top-down inhibition on the amygdala. It doesn't eliminate the amygdala's activity, but it dampens it. It turns down the volume on the threat signal. This is why surgeons can operate under life-or-death pressure without their hands shaking. It's not that they don't feel stress. It's that their attention is so deeply absorbed in the immediate task, the specific cut, the specific stitch, the specific millimeter of tissue, that their prefrontal cortex keeps the amygdala in check. There's another mechanism at play here, and it involves dopamine. Your brain's dopamine system, the mesolimbic pathway, doesn't just respond to rewards. It responds most strongly to the anticipation of rewards, and specifically to what neuroscientists call prediction errors. The gap between what you expected and what actually happened. When you're outcome-focused, your dopamine system is constantly generating predictions about results you can't control. Will the client buy? Will the deal close? Will the campaign work? And because you can't control these outcomes, the predictions are constantly being violated. Every uncertain signal becomes a negative prediction error, which triggers anxiety and avoidance. But when you shift to process focus, something remarkable happens. Your dopamine system starts generating predictions about actions you can control. Did I prepare my questions? Yes. Did I open the conversation by asking about their situation before presenting my solution? Yes. Did I listen without interrupting? Yes. Each of these micro-completions generates a small positive prediction error, a small dopamine hit, because you predicted you would do it and you did. This creates what researchers call a mastery loop, a self-reinforcing cycle of action, completion, and reward that builds momentum and replaces the anxiety spiral with an engagement spiral. And here's the key insight from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states. Flow doesn't happen when you're thinking about the outcome. Flow happens when the challenge of the task is perfectly matched to your skill level and your attention is fully absorbed in execution. You can't enter flow while monitoring the scoreboard. You can only enter flow while playing the game. Now let me connect this to a higher-level thinking framework, because this isn't just a neuroscience trick. It reflects a fundamental principle about how intelligent people should allocate their most scarce resource, which is not time, not money, but attention. Naval Ravikant has a concept that I think about constantly. He says that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your thoughts, and the quality of your thoughts is determined by what you choose to pay attention to. This sounds simple, but the implications are profound. If you spend your mental energy worrying about whether a prospect will say yes, you're investing your highest value cognitive resource into a variable you cannot influence in that moment. The client's decision depends on their budget, their internal politics, their timing, their personal preferences, their risk tolerance, 100 factors that exist entirely outside your sphere of action. You might as well worry about the weather. But if you invest that same mental energy into the quality of your preparation, the depth of your questions, the precision of your listening, the clarity of your value articulation, you're investing in variables that are entirely within your control. And crucially, these are the variables that actually influence the outcome, even though you're not focusing on the outcome directly. This is the paradox of control. The less you focus on the outcome, the more you influence it. Charlie Munger talks about this through his concept of inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I close this deal?" which fixates you on a result, invert the question. Ask, "What would guarantee I lose this deal?" Well, you'd lose it by not understanding the client's actual problem. You'd lose it by talking more than listening. You'd lose it by being so nervous that you can't think clearly. You'd lose it by pushing for a close before establishing trust. You'd lose it by failing to follow up. Now look at that list. Every single item on it is a process failure, not an outcome failure. The outcome, the lost deal, is just the downstream consequence of attention misallocation. Munger's inversion method naturally redirects your focus from "what result do I want" to "what errors must I avoid in my process," and that redirection is exactly the shift that quiets the amygdala and activates the prefrontal cortex. There's another layer here, and it comes from the way the Talmud thinks about work and commerce. In Talmudic thought, the emphasis is never on the result of a transaction alone. The emphasis is on the integrity of the process, the honesty of the representation, the fairness of the terms, the depth of understanding between parties, the fulfillment of the commitment. A merchant who deceives a customer to close a sale has failed, even if the sale is profitable. And a merchant who serves a customer honestly and loses the sale has succeeded in the most important sense, because they've preserved their reputation, their relationships, and their capacity for future commerce. This isn't naive idealism. It's sophisticated long-term thinking. When you define success as process integrity rather than outcome achievement, you become psychologically resilient. You can lose a deal without losing your confidence, because your confidence isn't attached to the deal. It's attached to how you showed up. And that brings us to what I think is the most misunderstood concept in all of personal development. Confidence. Most people think confidence is a feeling that precedes action. They think you need to feel confident and then you act, but that's backwards. Confidence, real, functional, durable confidence, is not a feeling at all. It's a byproduct of repeated process execution. It's what happens when you've shown up so many times, prepared so thoroughly, practiced so deliberately, that your nervous system simply stops treating the situation as a threat. It's not, "I believe I can do this." It's, "I've done the preparation. The outcome is irrelevant to my identity. I'm going to execute my process." That's not confidence in the motivational poster sense. That's equanimity. And equanimity is far more powerful than confidence because it doesn't depend on results. Now here's where most people get stuck. They hear this idea, focus on what you can control, and they nod along. It makes sense intellectually, but then they walk into the next meeting, and within 30 seconds, their attention snaps right back to the outcome. The client shifts in their chair and they think they're not interested. The client asks about pricing and they think it's too expensive. The client pauses before responding and they think, "I'm losing them." Why does this happen? Because knowing the principle is not the same as having trained the skill. And this is where the science of deliberate practice, the work of Anders Ericsson, and the research behind books like Peak becomes essential. Deliberate practice has 4 components: a specific target, training at the edge of your ability, immediate feedback, and precise correction. So let's apply this to sales anxiety specifically. The specific target is not be less anxious. That's too vague and it's outcome focused, which is exactly the pattern we're trying to break. The specific target is keep my attention on the client's words and my prepared questions for the first 5 minutes of every call without checking my internal state. Notice how precise that is. Not be present, not stay focused, but attend to the client's words and my prepared questions for 5 minutes. That's a specific, observable, trainable behavior. Training at the edge means you don't start with the highest stakes call of the week. You start with a call that matters, but where the outcome isn't career-defining. You give yourself a realistic challenge. Maintain process focus for 5 minutes, then 10, then the entire call. You progressively increase the difficulty, just as a musician would increase the tempo of a difficult passage. Immediate feedback is where most people fail. After each call, most salespeople either celebrate, "I got the meeting," or ruminate, "They said they'd think about it, that means no." Both of these responses are outcome-focused. Neither one gives you useful information about your process. Instead, the feedback question should be, during that call, where did my attention go? When did I lose focus on the client and start focusing on the outcome? What triggered that shift, and what would I do differently next time? This is where something like an AI-based review system becomes genuinely useful, not as a gimmick, but as a structural feedback mechanism. When you can replay a conversation, identify the exact moment your attention shifted, analyze what the client actually said versus what you assumed they meant, and practice a different response, that's deliberate practice with real feedback. That's how you build the neural pathways that make process focus automatic rather than effortful. And precise correction means you don't just identify the error, you rehearse the correction. If you notice that your attention collapses every time a client mentions budget, you don't just tell yourself, "Don't worry about budget objections." You prepare a specific, practiced response to budget conversations, and you rehearse it until it's automatic. You build what cognitive scientists call a procedural script, a preloaded response pattern that your brain can execute without burning prefrontal cortex resources on improvisation. This is the same principle that military personnel, emergency responders, and elite athletes use. They don't perform well under pressure because they're braver than you. They perform well because they've rehearsed their responses so thoroughly that execution doesn't require conscious decision-making. The process runs on autopilot, freeing their attention for the things that actually require judgment. Now, there's a nuance here that I want to flag, because I see people misunderstand this. When I say focus on what you can control, I'm not saying don't care about results. I'm not saying outcomes don't matter. Of course they matter. Revenue matters, growth matters, your business surviving matters. What I'm saying is that caring about results and fixating on results are 2 completely different cognitive states. Caring about results means you design a good process because you want good outcomes. Fixating on results means you monitor the outcome during execution, which degrades the process and, ironically, makes the outcome worse. A surgeon cares about the patient surviving. But during the operation, the surgeon is focused on the scalpel, the tissue, the next step. The caring happens before and after. The focus happens during. Let me give you a concrete scenario to make this tangible. Imagine a salesperson, let's call her Mia. Mia has a meeting with a VP of operations at a mid-sized logistics company. This is the biggest opportunity in her pipeline. If she closes it, she hits her quarterly target. If she doesn't, she's going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with her manager. Mia walks into the meeting with her attention locked on the outcome. She's thinking about the quota. She's thinking about what her manager will say. She's thinking about whether this VP has already talked to a competitor. The VP opens by saying, "We've been exploring a few options." Mia's amygdala fires. She interprets this as a threat signal. They're talking to competitors. Her cortisol spikes. Her working memory narrows. She starts talking faster, trying to differentiate her product, listing features the VP didn't ask about, preemptively addressing objections that haven't been raised. The VP grows quiet. Mia reads the silence as disengagement and doubles down, talking even faster, adding more features, more proof points, more case studies. By the end of the meeting, Mia has delivered a comprehensive product presentation to someone who never got the chance to explain what their actual problem was. The VP says, "Thanks, we'll be in touch." Mia walks out knowing she blew it, but she doesn't know why. She thinks the problem was her pitch. She thinks she needs better slides, better data, better proof. She'll spend the next 3 days refining her presentation deck. But none of that was the problem. The problem was that Mia's attention was on the wrong target. She was focused on closing the deal instead of understanding the client. And because her attention was on the outcome, her amygdala hijacked her prefrontal cortex, she lost her ability to listen, and she defaulted to a monologue that pushed the client away. Now imagine the same meeting, same stakes, same VP, same opening line. "We've been exploring a few options," but this time Mia has trained her attention differently. She hears the line and instead of interpreting it as a threat, she treats it as data. Her prepared response kicks in. "That makes sense. At your scale, you'd want to evaluate thoroughly. Can I ask what's driving the evaluation right now? What's changed in your operation that made this a priority?" That one question does 3 things simultaneously. It shows the VP that Mia isn't threatened by competition. It redirects the conversation toward the client's problem, which is where value is created. And it gives Mia's prefrontal cortex a specific task: listen to the answer, which keeps the amygdala in check. The VP starts talking about inefficiencies in their distribution chain. Mia listens. She asks follow-up questions. She takes notes. 20 minutes into the meeting, Mia knows more about this company's operational pain than the VP has told any other vendor, because no other vendor asked, because every other vendor was too busy pitching. Does Mia close the deal in this meeting? Maybe not, but she's done something far more important than close a deal. She's built understanding, which builds trust, which builds a relationship, which builds long-term revenue. She's positioned herself not as a vendor trying to hit a quota, but as a professional who understands the client's world. And here's the irony that I want you to notice. By not focusing on the close, Mia dramatically increased her probability of closing. The paradox of control, playing out in a real conference room. I want to deepen this one more level, because there's a structural insight here that goes beyond sales. Every person who's trying to build something, a career, a business, a personal brand, a body of work, faces the same fundamental challenge. You have to produce results in a world where results are partially outside your control. And the gap between what you can do and what the world does with what you've done is the space where anxiety lives. The question isn't how to eliminate that gap. You can't. The question is how to operate inside it without being consumed by it. And the answer, from everything I've studied and experienced and practiced, is this: build an identity around your process, not your outcomes. If your identity is "I'm a successful salesperson," then every lost deal is a threat to who you are. Your ego is attached to the scoreboard. You'll avoid difficult prospects because failure feels like self-destruction. You'll oversell easy clients because closing feels like self-validation. Your entire emotional life will be held hostage by variables you don't control. But if your identity is "I'm a person who shows up prepared," asks deep questions, listens more than I talk, follows up on commitments, and continuously improves my craft, then no single outcome can threaten who you are. You can lose a deal without losing your confidence, because your confidence isn't attached to the deal. It's attached to how you showed up. This is what Naval means when he talks about happiness being a skill, not a circumstance. It's what Munger means when he says the key is to avoid being stupid rather than trying to be brilliant. It's what Csikszentmihalyi found in 30 years of flow research. The people who experience the most sustained satisfaction are not the ones who achieve the most. They're the ones who are most absorbed in the process of what they're doing. And here's where this connects to something larger. In an era where AI is reshaping every industry, where job security is dissolving, where the traditional career ladder is being replaced by a lattice of gig work and personal branding and portfolio careers, the ability to sell yourself is no longer optional. Every person, whether they carry the title, salesperson or not, is in the business of communicating their value to others. Every job interview is a sale. Every pitch meeting is a sale. Every time you share an idea in a meeting and try to get buy-in, you're selling. And the anxiety that comes with selling yourself, the fear of rejection, the fear of being judged, the fear of putting yourself out there and hearing silence, that anxiety follows the exact same neural pattern I just described. It's an amygdala response to social threat, and it's managed the exact same way, by shifting attention from the outcome to the process. You can't control whether someone hires you. You can control how thoroughly you understand the role before the interview. You can't control whether your post goes viral. You can control the depth and honesty of what you write. You can't control whether a client says yes. You can control whether you showed up as someone worth saying yes to. This is not passivity. This is the most aggressive, the most ambitious strategic posture you can take, because when you're process-focused, you iterate faster. You learn more from each interaction. You don't waste weeks ruminating on a rejection that was never about you in the first place. You take the feedback, adjust your process, and go again. And over time, over months and years of compound iterations, you become so good, so precise, so attuned to the people you serve, that the outcomes take care of themselves. That's the compound interest of attention discipline. Naval talks about compound interest in the context of wealth, but attention compounds too. Every day you practice process focus, you're strengthening the neural pathways that support it. Every day you give in to outcome fixation, you're strengthening those pathways instead. Your brain is always being wired by what you practice. The question is whether you're choosing what to practice or letting your anxiety choose for you. Let me address one more thing before I give you the action framework, because I think it matters. Some people here focus on what you can control, and they interpret it as lower your standards. They think I'm saying, don't aim high, don't care about results, just go through the motions and accept whatever happens. That's not what I'm saying, not even close. What I'm saying is that high standards should apply to your process, not your expectations of the world. Hold yourself to the highest standard of preparation, of listening, of follow-through, of integrity, but hold the world to no standard at all, because the world doesn't owe you anything. The client doesn't owe you a yes. The market doesn't owe you success. The algorithm doesn't owe you views. When you hold the world to a standard and the world fails to meet it, you experience resentment, frustration, and entitlement. When you hold yourself to a standard and you meet it, you experience self-respect, momentum, and growth, regardless of what the world does. This is the distinction between internal locus of control and external locus of control. And decades of psychological research have shown that people with a strong internal locus of control, people who believe their actions are the primary determinant of their outcomes, consistently outperform, outlast, and outadapt people who attribute their results to luck, timing, or other people's decisions. Not because the internal locus people are deluded. The world does have randomness. Luck does matter. But the internal locus people act more, learn faster, and compound their skills over time, which eventually overwhelms the randomness. They play enough hands that the variance washes out and skill dominates. So here's what I want you to do. Not next month, not next quarter, this week. First, before your next high-stakes interaction, whether it's a sales call, a pitch meeting, a job interview, or a difficult conversation, write down 3 things that are within your control. Not outcomes, actions, things like, I will ask at least 3 questions before I present anything. I will listen to the full answer before responding. I will summarize the client's problem back to them before I offer a solution. Make these your success criteria for the meeting. If you execute these 3 actions, the meeting was a success, regardless of the outcome. Second, after the interaction, do a 5-minute debrief. Not, did I get what I wanted? But where did my attention go? Identify the specific moment, if there was one, where your focus shifted from the client to the outcome. What triggered it? What did the client say or do? What story did your mind tell? And what would you do differently next time to keep your attention on the process? Write it down. Even 2 sentences is enough, but write it down, because the act of writing externalizes the reflection and makes it concrete. Third, build a process scorecard for yourself. At the end of each day, rate yourself on 3 to 5 process metrics. Things like, did I prepare before each call? Did I follow up within 24 hours on every commitment I made? Did I ask at least 1 question I've never asked before? Did I listen more than I talked? Track these daily for 2 weeks. You'll start noticing patterns. You'll see which process behaviors correlate with better outcomes, not because you're chasing outcomes, but because better process naturally produces better results. Fourth, practice 1 attention redirection technique before every high-pressure moment. It can be as simple as this. Take 3 slow breaths, and on each exhale, silently name 1 specific thing you're going to do in the first 60 seconds of the interaction. Not what you hope will happen, what you will do. This preloads your prefrontal cortex with task-specific instructions and gives your brain a clear attentional target before the amygdala has a chance to hijack the show. And fifth, and this might be the most important one, stop reviewing your day by what you achieved. Start reviewing your day by what you progressed. Progress is not binary. You didn't either succeed or fail today. You moved forward in some areas and stalled in others. Name the areas where you moved forward. Name 1 thing you did better today than you did yesterday. Name 1 thing you understand now that you didn't understand this morning. If you can end every day by naming your progress rather than cataloging your shortfalls, you are rewiring your reticular activating system, the part of your brainstem that filters what you pay attention to scan for growth rather than for threat. And over time, this single habit will change not just how you feel, but what you notice, what you attempt, and what you build. The reason most people stay anxious isn't that they face hard situations. Everyone faces hard situations. The reason most people stay anxious is that they've accidentally trained their brain to evaluate every situation by a metric they can't influence, and then they wonder why they feel powerless. You are not powerless. You are paying attention to the wrong scoreboard. The scoreboard that matters is not the one on the wall. It's the one inside your process. And unlike the one on the wall, that scoreboard is entirely yours to move. Real confidence doesn't come from knowing the outcome will be good. Real confidence comes from knowing that regardless of the outcome, you showed up as the person you intended to be. If this connected with something you've experienced, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more. Let me know, what is 1 specific moment in a recent sales call, interview, or high-stakes conversation where you noticed your attention shift from the other person to your own anxiety, and what happened next?